Benin is famous for their large body of historical ancient artifacts, popularly known as the Benin bronzes. Yet, somehow, most of the art cannot be found in the Benin kingdom itself. About 90% of the art are in different countries around the world. However, the Benin artifacts are returning back to its motherland. Here's a story of the stolen Benin artifacts with an insight with the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments for Nigeria, Mr. Olubile Holloway. Arise correspondent Jennifer Olize shares this report.
This is the story of the stolen Benin artifacts and the return to its motherland. When you mention the Benin Kingdom, you think of an extremely rich cultural heritage and its legendary arts and crafts dating back to the 10th century. Benin is famous for their large body of historical ancient artifacts. Yet, somehow, most of the art cannot be found in the Benin Kingdom itself. 1897, there was an operation to invade the Kingdom of Benin, capture the Benin Oba, and destroy the Benin city. The operation was named the Benin Punitive Expedition. The British Empire's soldiers sacked and looted the city. More than thousands of historical objects from the Benin Kingdom were looted. About 40% of the art was sent to the British Museum, while others were given to individual members of the armed forces as spoils of war, and the remainder were sold as auctions. The Benin Kingdom has one of the oldest ongoing monarchies in the world. The current Oba, His Royal Majesty, Oba Ewuweri II, the great-great-grandson of the Oba who was ambushed by the British in 1897, started his rule by demanding the stolen Benin bronzes had to come back to where they were taken from. The federal government of Nigeria, as well as the Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments, have made several efforts to secure the repatriation of the looted artifacts from all the museums around the world, in order to preserve the Benin culture, heritage, and tradition. Decades ago, no one would ever imagine these Benin artifacts will return back to the original owners. But now, the story has changed. In recent times, the artifacts are beginning to return back piece by piece to the Benin Kingdom, now known as Benin City, the capital of Edo State in Nigeria. In October 2021, Jesus College, part of the University of Cambridge, became the first institution in the world to return a Benin bronze to Nigeria. In an October 11, 2022 ceremony, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C., transferred ownership of 29 Benin bronzes to the National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Nigeria. In December 2022, German representatives visited the Nigerian capital to officially hand over 22 bronzes, physically returning 2, a plaque and an Oba's head as a gesture of good faith. In May 2024, the 2 items were handed over to the NCMM on behalf of the Nigerian government by the German authorities in 2022. The Director General of the NCMM, Mr. Oluwole Holloway made the presentation on behalf of the federal government through the National Commission for the Museum and Monuments. In a ceremony held on 15th of July 2024 at the Benin Palace in Nigeria, the museum restituted 2 objects, a brass plaque and a wooden altarpiece, to Oba Ewuwari II, returned by the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art. I got a chance to sit down with Mr. Oluwole Holloway, the Director General of the NCMM, and discuss the return of the Benin artifacts. There's a popular film, Black Panther, by Ryan Coogler. It came out in 2018. Now, there's a museum haze scene in the movie that added a lot of fuel to the debate about the African art resolution. And in the movie, one of the stars of the movie, Michael J. Jordan, actually went as far as saying, how do you think your ancestors got these? Do you think they paid a fair price, or did they take it like they took everything else? How did you feel? Have you watched the movie, first of all?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and how did you feel when that scene?
I know the exact scene you're talking about. Okay. So I think that was a very powerful scene. Okay. And I think the scene perhaps ignited a wider discussion about these artifacts and my repatriation and things like that. While I don't condone the stealing of an artifact from a foreign museum, I understand the sentiment of the character and the question raised about how these artifacts were obtained in the first place is a conversation that needs to be had, because the reality is that these artifacts were stolen.
100%.
And I think that in 2024, the dialogue that needs to happen now needs to be around truth and reconciliation.
Exactly.
Right? I think everyone needs to come clean and own up to what was done. And a lot of rights have to be wronged. If you look at the 1897 expedition, where Oba Varawen was removed, okay, the tragedy is really what spurred this whole spread of Benin artifacts around the world. 1897 was the actual day that, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of the British soldiers, yes, with the loots and everything. So for me, it's about restoration.
Okay.
It's also about paying homage to our heritage and going back into the past and correcting a lot of the wrongs and, you know, giving the Nigerian a strong sense of identity about where they're coming from, about where their ancestors were coming from. And the fact that you come from a long line of great men and women that have come before you, and to see these artifacts and to appreciate them, for me, I think will go a long way in reigniting that inner self-worth. And I think when you speak of the renewed hope agenda, I think that a renewed hope agenda cuts across different aspects of the human experience, even heritage, even the appreciation of the past. Correct. And the appreciation of our ancestors and what they believed in and what they stood for. I think that it has to be an all-encompassing story, and I think that this commission is committed to changing the narrative and really doing our own part to make sure that our heritage is truly appreciated.
But the return is not the end of the story for these magnificent objects. The story of the stolen Benin artifacts is a powerful narrative of resilience and cultural heritage. The ongoing efforts to restoring these artifacts not only honors the legacy of the Benin Kingdom, but also empowers the future generation to recognize, respect, and celebrate their rich cultural history.
Well, the infamous Benin punitive expedition by British soldiers in 1897 is being remembered today after 128 years. That piece of British colonial history in this part of the world saw the toppling and humiliation of Oba Overame by the British crown. The monarch was forced into exile to Calabar, where he eventually died. When the invading soldiers sacked and looted the city, thousands of historic objects from the Benin Kingdom were looted. About 90% of the art are said to be in different countries around the world, with the British Museum holding most of the artifacts. The Benin artifacts were considered priceless treasures that played an integral part in the culture and values of the Benin Kingdom because of the spiritual beliefs of the people. In recent years, efforts have been initiated to return many of those historical pieces to the motherland. Well, joining us now to have a quick chat around that is Olubile Holloway, who is the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. Good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, 128 years after, I have to say, of course, congratulations on the first set of Benin bronzes and the art that has been returned to Nigeria. But before we, dive into that, the Benin punitive expedition, like I rightfully said, described as one of the most infamous acts of cultural and historical theft during the colonial rule. Could you reflect on the significance of this event, particularly how the forced removal of the Oba at the time and the subsequent looting of Benin treasures disrupted the spiritual, cultural, and social fabric of the kingdom? Yeah.
Well, thank you for that question. So I think we first have to understand the context in which the punitive expedition happened. The Benin Kingdom had existed for hundreds of years, undisturbed prior to this. And as you are aware, this was a kingdom that was widely respected across the region. So I'm sure you can imagine the impact such an event would have had on the psyche of the Benin people at the time. And then also the looting and the sacking of Benin itself. A lot of lives were lost, and as you're aware, subsequently, a lot of the artifacts found themselves around the world. And these artifacts still remain in museums around the world till today. So the collective trauma of what happened in 1897 hasn't really gone away because, as you're aware, people go to museums and they ask themselves, how come all these pieces are in foreign museums and we don't have as many in museums in Nigeria? So definitely, I think that the context is important in understanding the impact this has had, not just on the Benin people, but also on Nigerians and Africans as a whole.
All right, thank you, Mr. Holloway. I would like to, two questions from me. Can you hear me, Mr. Holloway?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, two questions as a follow-up to what my colleague Shaitan asked. And essentially is to find out what your commission, National Commission for Museums and Monuments, is doing in terms of the works that are now being returned from Germany, from the UK, hopefully from France, given the sort of discussions that you're having. What role are you playing? Because we know that part of what has been gazetted is that most of these things will go, and not just to Benin in Edo State, but to the palace. And therefore, what role are you playing, and what role do you think that the Museum of West African Art, which will open in Benin next year, will play, given that this was a project of the former governor, Godwin Obaseki, and it doesn't look like that museum will be able to welcome any of the works, because the agreement was that they will go to the Royal Museum that will be sited in the palace. So what's your own role, and how do you think that the palace and the Museum of West African Art will collaborate to ensure good custody of the work that are coming in? And secondly, how many of the Benin bronzes do you have at the National Museum at this time? And I believe that that will be in Lagos, given the fact that even though you are speaking to us from Abuja, there isn't a national museum in Abuja. So how many of such works do you have in Lagos at the moment, outside of the ones that are going to the palace in Benin?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I think first we have to separate, there are two separate issues. MOA is a private institution. MOA is an institution that has been driven by private individuals. There are partners. The NCMM does a lot of work with MOA. But as far as the Benin bronzes are concerned, the NCMM's role is a central and pivotal role as far as the future of these bronzes. The Oba of Benin and the NCMM are working hand in hand to ensure that the Benin bronzes are available to be seen by as many Nigerians as possible. The plan is that a management agreement will be signed between the NCMM and the Royal Court. This is currently being worked on as we speak. The storage facility we're currently constructing in Benin will be completed by Q1 this year. And the vision is that the returned bronzes will be stored there temporarily. And as time goes on, they will be spread across the NCMM's network of museums across the country. The Oba is also in the process of establishing the Benin Royal Museum. This museum will also display the most exquisite pieces as well. So it's really a joint exercise between the National Commission for Museums and Monuments and the Benin Royal Court. Because it's important that in anything we do concerning the Benin bronzes, we must carry along the custodians of Benin culture, embodied in the person of the Oba of Benin. As far as the second question you asked about the items in Lagos, I can't give you an exact number, but I assure you that we have quite a few items in storage and in display in Lagos. For us to display more of these items, it's important that we embark on an expansion of the museum because you need more space to show more artifacts. So that is also currently being worked on. Now, as far as the people's ability to come and appreciate these objects, for us, a central part of showing the objects is the storytelling behind it. You're not just going to look at an object, you want to know the story behind the object, the meaning of the object, the spiritual significance of the object, and what historical part of Benin culture that object speaks to. So these are things that we're all currently working on. We're working with experts, curatorial experts that are actually doing the work. And the whole point of a museum really is the storytelling. That is what gives the objects the context so that when people see them, they can truly appreciate them.
Will that expansion include the possibility of a museum in Abuja at some point?
Absolutely. And I think that it is very important that a museum in Abuja is developed. And I can assure you that the Ministry of Arts, Culture, Tourism, and the Creative Economy, being driven obviously by the NCMM, this is something that is top priority for us because it is important that the most populous black nation on the face of the earth has a befitting museum in its capital. While we currently have a museum in Lagos, which obviously Lagos plays a historical part in the story of Nigeria, the independence was granted in Lagos, and there's a huge history there. Abuja still is the capital, and so it is important that in our vision for the NCMM and for the museum ecosystem in Nigeria, that a museum is constructed in Abuja, and we are working on this.
All right, then, a very excellent submission this morning. But let's talk about this debate that has been going on since the conversation about the return of the Benin bronzes came to light. I'm talking about the debate about who has the right to possess and preserve looted artifacts that has been a contentious issue. I mean, sitting, from where I'm sitting, it should seem like an obvious answer, but some argue that these treasures are better preserved and accessible in Western institutions. Now, how would you respond to such claims, especially considering the rich cultural context that is lost when these artifacts are removed from their origin? And then secondly, as the DG of NCMM yourself, you oversee a critical part of Nigeria's cultural heritage. So beyond the Benin artifacts, what are your broader goals? I mean, you've touched on the museum in Abuja, but what else should we be expecting from your commission to help protect Nigeria's cultural legacy in the faces of challenges like illicit trafficking, inadequate funding and infrastructure, and even globalization?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I think that the first part of your question about the objects being better off in foreign museums, I think we need, as Nigerians and as Africans, we need to reprogram our minds. This concept that anything foreign is better than anything Nigerian or African is really at the root cause of why a lot of our heritage and artifacts aren't appreciated in the first place. As you can see, the Nigerian arts and culture space in the last 5-6 years has shown the world that Nigerians are able to value and preserve art. If you see what the likes of Access Bank, Coronation, just to name a few, are doing in the art space, right? So as far as our ability to fund art and appreciate art, I think that we started to show the world that the days where you would have the impression that Nigeria is a third world country where we would probably just throw these objects away, I think those days are gone. I think that it's also important for us to take ownership of our story and our history, because the vast majority of Nigerians can't travel abroad freely to appreciate these objects in the first place. So how do you intend to educate your people about their heritage when they can't see their heritage? So it's important that we start to take ownership and return these objects so that you and I, our children, can go to a museum and study their history in a practical sense. And while we will still entertain conversations about keeping some objects abroad on loan, because we still have Nigerians in the diaspora that also want to go and appreciate these objects in foreign museums. But we also have to understand that the vast majority or a good number must also come home so that Nigerians at home as well can appreciate their heritage. And I think that it's important that we get the storytelling right so that, you know, you're going to the museum not just to see the object, but to actually have an emotional connection with the object, you know, and have a stronger sense of identity of where you come from and where your people come from. So I think that's the first question. The second question, I believe, was
what more you're doing
around,
besides
I've lost my.
What more
yes.
you're doing besides
yes,
you know,
thank you. The vision. Yes. So with the NCMM, we have to understand that being tasked with this mandate of preserving Nigeria's cultural heritage, we must start to leverage on technology, right? And technology in the sense that we want to work with the airports, the customs services, and all the enforcement agencies to ensure that the illicit trafficking of artifacts is greatly reduced. But beyond that, I think it's important to rethink what the concept of the museum is in the first place. The museum as we have it is a concept that we can't just take the Western concept of the museum and expect it to fit into the Nigerian reality. So I think a huge part of what we have to do is to reimagine the concept. How do we localize the concept of a museum? Why can't we have narratives in other languages in the museum? There's no reason why you can't go to the Lagos Museum and have an audio describing an object in Yoruba. Or you go to a museum in the north and you have audios in Hausa and Hausa music playing and actually entrenching the people in the culture. While English, yes, is our national language, I think it's important to also understand that some of these objects cannot properly be described in English because the context doesn't exist to describe certain things, especially the spiritual aspects of some of these objects. So I think that there's a reorientation that has to happen. So with the whole renewed hope, there's renewed thinking, there's renewed heritage, and there's so much that can happen around this space. And I truly believe that we're sitting on a gold mine that is not even, we've not even started to scratch the surface. And it is my belief that this new administration is firmly committed to ensuring that our heritage, not just Benin, but Ife, Nok, Igbo Ukwu, you name it. We give these objects the befitting heritage and display to the world and show that we truly are at the beginning of the Nigerian and African Renaissance.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. As we begin to wrap up very quickly, I like what you said about, localizing the idea of museum, and I'm sure that you know that that's part of what the J. Randu Center for Yoruba Culture and History is suffering in Lagos State, which I believe that many other museums that you might be involved with should be emulating. But very quickly to my question, in the interview that you had with our colleague Jennifer Olise, you mentioned the aspect of truth and reconciliation on the one hand, and then you've also repeated here the idea of a renewed hope agenda for the arts and culture. And my question is, I would like to know how that tie into the sort of discussion that you'll be having with foreign arts institutions and museums who are holding our artworks, particularly in the UK, given the opinion of our sister, who's the leader of the Conservative Party now, Kemi Badenoch, who says that she thinks that people should move on the idea of reparation. And you know that many art historians and many art aficionados believe that returning artworks, return of the artworks, is an integral part of reparation. How do you think that your institution, in line with the Renewed Hope agenda for the arts, will engage such a person who is from here, but who thinks that we should move on from discussion of slavery and to an extent returning our artworks that were stolen from here to us?
So in response to that, I think that we must always try and be honest with ourselves. Returning objects is not about the object in itself. It's about what the object symbolizes. It's about the dignity of the people that own those objects, right? So I think it's difficult for two nations to sit down at the table as equals when there are things in the past that haven't been discussed. So I think it's super important that truth and reconciliation is done. This was also done in South Africa after the apartheid regime, where both parties were invited for talks and things like that. We're currently having these discussions with museums, and I assure you that in these discussions, I'm quite open and honest with them about how I see things and about what I think needs to be done. In response to certain Nigerians in the diaspora that feel that we should move on, it's easy to say that on one hand, but when you steep yourself in history and go through what has happened to not just Nigeria, but the continent, you start to understand that the black race does suffer from a lot of collective trauma. And I think that this is evidence in how we perhaps interact with the world and feeling somehow like second-class citizens of this world. And I think that our heritage and our culture is the beginning of us finding our new identity and standing toe-to-toe with other civilizations. The Indians appreciate their culture. You go to Indian restaurants, you see statues of Buddha. You go to Chinese restaurants, you see pictures and images of their own cultural icons. But we as Africans seem to shy away from depicting these things. And I think that it's time that we start to understand that this identity of ours is really all we have, and it's really what we have to offer the world. And if you see our music industry is a perfect example of that. It's when our artists started embracing the indigenous language, the likes of Da Green, the likes of Olamide, the likes of Burna Boy and Fino, that the world started paying attention to us. When we were just making copies of the foreign songs, we were not global. So this shows you that for the world to respect you, you must have a true sense of who you are and what you have to offer the world. And I think this is what the NCMM, the ministry, is deeply concerned with. And we will ensure that there is a renewed heritage as well as a renewed hope.
All right, then. Thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. We can't wait to hear what happens with the NTMM.